Okay, so I'd like to start by thanking ASEF for the very kind invitation for me to join you in this event. As has been said, I'm a learning scientist and I've been involved in education for my whole career, but in AI and education for the last 10 years. And today my plan, excuse me, today I'm going to be talking about the future of AI in higher education. And in fact, AI for me brings some amazing possibilities. And there are lots of people out there, AI in education cheerleaders, because AI in education is, it's a $6 billion market. But I'm not going to do that. In fact, you might think I'm a bit negative because I see my role as thinking about the very many challenges and trying to get behind the hyperbole. In other words, I take a critical studies perspective. In fact, the connections between AI and education are more complex than many people suggest. So I'm going to start by exploring these connections in terms of my three categories or buckets. Now, like any category system, my buckets overlap, but I still think that the categorization is helpful. So here are my three buckets. The first one is learning with AI. So AI that's used to support students or teachers or systems. Then we have learning about AI, how AI works, how to create it, the techniques, the technologies, and so on. And thirdly, what I call preparing for AI. What does it mean for us to live with AI? What is the impact on human values and ethics? So I'll begin by looking at learning with AI, and I'll start with system supporting. So system supporting AI is that AI that's used to support school or university administration. So things like recruitment or timetabling, attendance recording, financial planning, and so on. Now, all of these are quite big. They fit a great deal with standard uses of AI in business. And for me, they're not that interesting. So to move quickly on to the next category, student supporting learning with AI. And there are many different types. And this is where all that money I mentioned earlier is. So I'm going to look at some of the types, just a few. To begin with, the so-called intelligent tutoring systems. So with these, the student engages with an interface which gives them some information, an activity, perhaps a quiz, and then depending on what they do, well, that determines the next piece of information, the next activity, the next quiz that they receive. And the list of names on the right-hand side there are the many multi-million-dollar funded companies that run these systems. But then we also have dialogue-based tutoring systems, far fewer of these, but these use a Socratic conversational approach to guiding the learner to find their way through the material to be learned. Then we have automatic writing evaluation, mostly for formative assessment, but increasingly, particularly in the US, for summative assessment. Then we have what I call learning network orchestrators, which this uses AI to connect people together, like the smart learning partner from Beijing that's in the screen. With this system, if a student hasn't understood something in their classroom, they call up the app, type in what they want to know, and the app connects them with a list of human tutors, all rated by other students, just like a dating app. And then they get 20 minutes of one-to-one human tuition, sharing the screen and voice only. And then, of course, we have language learning apps. These are really a subtype of the so-called intelligent tutoring systems, but with natural language processing to check the student's choice of words and pronunciation. And finally, chatbots, which are increasingly being used across higher education to provide immediate support to students, mostly about practical things such as where is my next class, when does my exam take place. So that's just a very quick overview of some examples of student supporting AI tools that mostly try to replace teacher functions. Now, what about teacher supporting rather than teacher replacing AI tools? Well, the reality is that currently there's very little AI that's genuinely designed to support teachers. I've only actually come across a few, and they're all involved in curating resources. And so the first one is this one, X5 Don, that I first learned about working with ASEF in Japan. And this tool uses AI to identify, to scrape the internet and to find exactly the open education resources that a particular teacher wants for a particular task. And then we have a similar one from IBM, this is called the Teacher Advisor, but there's also one from Lebanon called Clever Owl. But that's about all the AI tools that are specifically designed to support teachers that I've been able to find. If you hear of any, don't hesitate to let me know. But anyway, that's system supporting, student supporting, and teacher supporting learning with AI. So what about learning about AI? Well, to begin with, there are lots of initiatives, and of course, universities around the world have long offered courses teaching the subjects that are centered on AI, such as machine learning, coding, data science, statistics. That's been around for a long time and is just getting bigger and bigger. But we also have things like this, which is a US initiative, which is developing a curriculum for schools in K-12, and it focuses on 5 big ideas: AI and perception, representation and reasoning, learning, natural interaction, and societal impact. I always have to read that because it's quite a complex list. And then we have this at UNESCO, where we've been a range of projects where we're looking to find what AI curricula there is around the world. And what was interesting, you know, we contacted 190 odd countries, and we've only been able to find 15 different countries that have a recognized curricula. And also we have this website that's all about giving links to free resources that people can use to teach about AI. And then we have this, Elements of AI from Finland, which is designed for the ordinary citizen, for people like you and me. So anyway, in summary, this bucket, the learning about AI bucket, is already pretty well developed, well, there's a lot more that needs to happen. However, what about the third bucket, preparing for AI? So I'm talking about preparing everyone for the impact of AI on humanity. How do we deal with the AI hype, AI biases, fake news, the impact on privacy and on jobs, to name just a few of the issues? Well, around the world, many researchers are now focusing on the impact of AI on people, such as the AI Now Institute in New York. But now we need to extend this to help everyone, all students and all citizens, understand and be able to deal with these growing issues and how to get through the hype. Now, you might think that this bucket, preparing for AI, should be part of the previous bucket, learning about AI, and I'd agree. For me, preparing for AI should be integrated within every learning about AI course, with the human aspects interwoven with the technology aspects, and not just left to the end as a tick box exercise, as so often happens. So what about AI in higher education specifically? Well, I recently was part of an EU Erasmus Plus project that looked at AI in higher education. We were based in 3 countries, and we applied the 3 buckets model to higher education. And in so doing, we identified 3 case studies in each of the countries. And what we realized was that all 9 of the case studies completely coincidentally turned out to be learning with AI. And of those, 5 were the so-called intelligent tutoring systems. So what we did, we realized that actually for AI in higher education, it's more complex than the 3 bucket model. So we also had to think about what was happening now. We had to anticipate what will be happening next and speculate what might be happening much later. And we did this in terms of developments, enablers, and disablers. And we use this framework in an online workshop, encouraging our participants to populate the various categories. And already you can see here that preparing for AI received far fewer comments than the other two buckets, and that learning with AI was the busiest. Now, this is anecdotal, but I still think it's interesting. So we took these insights and we turned them into these tables to summarize the ideas about learning with AI, learning about AI, and preparing for AI. I'm sorry, I haven't got time to go through the tables, but I've included them in the presentation in case you're interested and you can look at them later. So what about these hypes and exaggerations? Well, let's start with AI in general. Now, like any innovation with AI, there's often more hype and more myths than reality. To begin with, AI isn't always as smart as many claim. Here's a couple of examples. So when I ask you to look at this, I expect and ask you, what is it? You're going to tell me it's a panda. And the AI system that was used with this agrees, 57.7% confident. But what happens when we mix that picture of the panda with this noise? Well, we end up with this. And what do you see here? Well, I suspect all of you humans are still going to say that it's a panda. And in fact, the AI is now almost 100% confident. The problem is it's 100% confident is now a gibbon. So AI is not as smart as everybody claims. Here's another example. This is face recognition, a tool from Amazon. For lighter skinned males, the system is pretty good. If you happen to be a darker skinned male, not quite so good. A lighter skinned female, even worse. And darker skinned females, unacceptable. But, you know, maybe this is just about the maturity of the tech, and as it develops, it will get better. But that still leaves open the question whether face recognition should be used widely at all. Another myth is that AI doesn't need people, but that's simply not true. A human chooses and cleans the data. A human labels the data. This is a picture from Kenya, where those people are employed to spend all day looking at images and drawing boxes around them and label them. There's a car, there's a person, there's a car. And then they move to the next frame in the video and repeat it all through the day. And without that, autonomous cars would simply not be autonomous cars. They need people. A human also designs the network. A human trains the network. A human creates the outputs and, importantly, makes the value judgments. AI also has problems in other domains. So when the COVID pandemic hit, we were told that this is fantastic, AI is going to be able to really help. But the reality is that in all of the big studies, and this is from Nature, one of the biggest, the most important journals in the world, none of the models identified of any potential clinical use. And this was just one of several meta-analyses that came up with this. But it's not just in COVID, also work with AI and breast cancer has also shown to be not that good. Maybe it's just early days. So what about when we put this into education? What are the hypes? So what are the claims made by the AI and education companies, and how do they stand up? Well, I'm going to focus on learning with AI tools, but seen through the lens of preparing for AI. Firstly, many claim that AI education tools are intelligent, but they're not. Machine learning and AI, which is the dominant approach, is about statistics and pattern finding and data. No AI system today comes anywhere close to human intelligence, and no AI education tool is anywhere near as intelligent as a human teacher. AI systems in education are still extremely limited in what they can achieve. Sometimes they might appear intelligent, but that's a long way from actually being intelligent. It's all smoke and mirrors, and we really shouldn't allow ourselves to be fooled. Another claim is that these learning with AI tools will save teacher time across schools and universities. But that claim has been made about education technologies for almost 100 years, and it's never happened. Of course, AI, we're told, is different, and AI tools will finally save teacher time. I know that most teachers, including me, would love a tool that takes care of our marking. But this ignores how much a teacher learns about their students when they read what the student has written, insights that no dashboard will ever give. And in any case, no AI system is capable of the depth of interpretation or accuracy of analysis that a teacher can give. So maybe AI will save teacher time, but we don't have any evidence for that. But at what cost to the quality of teaching and learning? And if it does save teacher time, with a focus on efficiency, which is not a word I personally find comfortable in education, what will the impact be on teacher or academic jobs? What about personalisation? This is something we hear about all the time. It's an ambition that's again been around for almost 100 years, which has re-emerged most recently from Silicon Valley. If we can have personalised recommendations on Netflix, why can't we do that in education? Indeed, Pearson, one of the biggest education companies in the world, is currently trying to rebrand itself as the Netflix of education. But for me, this completely misses the point. Some learning with AI tools might provide each student with their own individual pathway through the materials, but they still take them to the same fixed learning outcomes as everyone else. For me, this is a weak understanding of personalisation. Real personalisation is not about pathways, but about helping each individual student to achieve their own potential, to self-actualize, which is something that no existing AI tool does. And then education is also about collaboration and other social interaction aspects of teaching and learning, which is the antithesis of the so-called personalization that so many AI and education tools claim, but mostly fail to provide. So for me, it all depends on what you want your education system to achieve. Students with lots of exam certificates, or independent, creative and critical thinkers who are able to help society develop most effectively for the common good. For me, that's the choice. Not only that, but almost every existing commercial learning with AI tool adopts a behaviorist or instructionist approach, an extremely primitive approach to teaching and learning, which involves spoon-feeding information while avoiding failure, and which ignores more than 60 years of pedagogical developments. And in so doing, they disempower teachers and university lecturers, turning them all too often into mere technology facilitators. Again, for me, this misses the point, ignoring the amazing skills that human teachers and lecturers and academics have that no AI tool can replicate. It also represents the commercialization of education by stealth, as education systems and universities increasingly rely on educational tools provided by the commercial sector, including big tech such as Facebook, Google, and Amazon. That's not the world I want. And I worry that this is the logical conclusion of current approaches to AI in education. When a child's born, why don't we just simply embed a microchip with all the world's knowledge in their brain? Or perhaps we could do it with a pill. Now, this might seem an exaggeration, but the chip is not beyond the realm of possibility. Elon Musk is developing brain-based computer chips as we speak. However, again, this misses the point. It conflates education and learning with knowledge acquisition. But education, especially in higher education, is so much more than that. Finally, in the pandemic, as AI moved online, many assessments also moved online, and exam monitoring or e-proctoring companies saw their businesses grow massively. But the use of e-proctoring is hugely controversial. It's accused of intrusion, failing to work properly, preventing students taking their exams, and exacerbating mental health problems. The point is that this is another example of automating poor pedagogic practices, rather than using AI to develop innovative approaches. So why are we using AI to facilitate exams, which we all know are shallow and less than useful? Instead, where is the AI that's innovating how we assess and accredit learning? But even if you reject my concerns, if you think I'm making a fuss over nothing, we still don't really know if any of the AI tools actually do what they claim to do. Where's the evidence? The reality is that almost no AI in education companies' products have been independently evaluated. It's all just marketing. If the learning with AI tools are so good, where are the robust, independent, randomized controlled trials? There are almost none. Those that do exist have been carried out in the US, which means that not only are they limited in scope, but they're also limited in applicability to other countries. So where are the robust studies from elsewhere in the world? The question is, what are they trying to hide? Having said all that, what some AI tools can achieve in education is impressive. And the researchers have overcome some huge technical challenges. In a sense, they've managed to climb this huge mountain. But still, the tools that they've developed are very limited when compared with human teachers and contemporary pedagogy. And frequently, they're highly questionable. All too often, they reduce student agency, they're intrusive, they're not really personalized, instead they aim to homogenize students, and they undermine teachers and teaching. In fact, they ignore the bigger mountain of possibilities that AI might help achieve. Rather than automating poor pedagogic practices, AI developers need to leverage AI's amazing capabilities to innovate teaching and learning without compromising pedagogy or human values, to empower students and teachers, to support inclusion and equity, and for the common good. So instead of pretending that an AI tool is better than a teacher, and if they're not better, why do we spend money on them? Where's the AI-powered virtual exoskeleton for teachers that helps them become super teachers? So far, there's little research into such a thing and no known commercial products. So how do we address this? Well, it needs educators and AI developers to work together. However, they speak different languages, equally valid, but different. Still, it's essential that we as educators don't allow AI engineers to dominate the conversation. I also think there's a role for people like me, and I imagine many of you, the babelfish, who exist on the shoreline between these two worlds, translating ideas. We need to help educators see how AI could transform pedagogy for the good. And we need to help the AI engineers understand what are the real education issues. So, in conclusion, to be clear, although it might have sounded otherwise, I'm not criticizing AI or AI in education. I still believe that there is some amazing potential. But I am criticizing current applications of AI in education and the way things are currently developing. In my opinion, we need to change the trajectory. So I am saying AI is clever, but not as clever as many people claim. AI is already having a major impact on education, and it has the potential to transform education for good, but also, if we're not careful, for bad. We need to avoid simply automating poor pedagogic practices. We need to empower teachers and lecturers and academics, and we need to promote student agency. We need to recognize that embedding commercial AI tools in classrooms and universities is a commercialization of education by the back door. And we need to ensure that AI in education meets real needs. And in HE, well, we need training for academics to build their knowledge, skills, and values around AI, and to address the myths and hyperbole. We need to be far more careful about our student data, not assume that students are okay with us using AI to process that data, nor that it's okay to give that data to the big tech companies. We need to recognize that using many AI products means the commercialization of education by stealth. And universities, in my opinion, need to take a lead in the education of all citizens, helping prepare all of us and ensuring that AI in education is for the common good. Okay, thank you very much for listening.